Okay. So welcome to 5 Vegetables to Sow in May. This is this is the first of what I'm hoping is going to be monthly workshops on different gardening topics, and so I hope you enjoy it. And so to introduce myself, I'm Dan Breezewell. I'm part of Tourne-Sol Cooperative Farm. We are about 20 people who work on the farm. There's 7 of us who are members of the worker co-op, and then we have an additional 12 or 13 employees from working with us for a few years. Some of them may become future members. And that's me on the far left. We're situated in Les Cèdres, Quebec, so about 45 minutes from downtown Montreal, depending on traffic. And we're predominant. Well, we're vegetable growers and we're seed growers. So we grow vegetables for 500 families a week who come and pick up vegetable baskets from our farm or one of our off-farm locations in the West Island. And then we also grow seed, which we sell through our online seed catalog. And today I'm going to be talking specifically, I guess maybe more from the growing hat than from the vegetable hat. But I guess the growing vegetable hat. And so we're going to talk about 5 crops that you could plant in spring. And so the first question to ask is, how early can you start planting in your garden? And it's going to depend a lot on where you are in Quebec or Canada if you're listening from further afield. But essentially what you're looking for, well, essentially there are crops that are really sensitive to frost, and there are crops that can tolerate frost quite well. And there's a lot of crops that can take much more cold than you might imagine, but they need to be planted in situations that will let them live. And so really what makes it how early can you plant is based on, are you in an area that there's no more snow? If you still have snow currently, then you probably can't plant. And how's your garden drained? Can you work the ground? If you can go in and you can move it and you can work the soil and it's not like soup, then you can probably start planting. If it has a nice tilt, even if it's a bit moist, you can start planting at this point. And there's certain crops that'll do a little bit better than others. But if you're in the West Island of Montreal or in zone 5 or 6, you probably can start planting at this point. If you're in zone 3 or 4, I can imagine it might be a little bit on the early side, unless you're in an area that you have part of your garden is much warmer because of a building or a little microclimate, or maybe you grow in a tunnel, but that's maybe a separate workshop. And so it's really about what crops can you plant? And that's what we're going to focus on now. Is I'm going to go through. So there's actually quite a lot of vegetables that you can plant in April. I'm saying May here, but what I'm talking about, you can also plant in April if your ground can be worked up. And probably as long as you're not going much beneath -4 degrees outside. That's maybe a little bit on the cold side. If you're going down to nights of -10 or -13, a lot of these crops won't like that. But a lot of crops can take a certain amount of frost and bounce back. And if you're going to have a really cold night, you could cover them with a row cover or a blanket or something to just help them get through that. Because usually it's just 1 or 2 cold nights, and then you're going through a warm period again. And that's important to know. So we're going to do 5 vegetables. And the number 1 vegetable that you should consider growing at this time of year is spinach. Spinach is so cold hardy. It can easily take -6 degrees Celsius and bounce back. And it loves cool weather. So now is the time that now is the perfect time to grow spinach. And spinach doesn't like the summer particularly. So now is really a good time to grow spinach. And I guess I should say, a lot of the crops I'm going to mention, some of them you could start indoors and plant them out. But like everything I'm going to talk about today, you can direct seed outdoors directly. So spinach is something you could start indoors and plant it out if you want, but you can also seed it directly outdoors, and it will germinate, and it's going to love this weather. And so now is a great time to grow spinach. And you can grow it really densely, open up a furrow, grow it dense, and then have the baby leaves, or you can plant it a little further apart to have a bigger plant. Or you could grow it dense and then thin it out to have some bigger plants come in. The spinach that you sow now will probably not last. It's going to be ready in 5-6 weeks, and it will bolt, and you'll get some harvest off it. So you have to plant spinach a few times, so it might be worth planting a couple times right now. If you had planted spinach last fall and it survived in your winter, because sometimes it does do that, and with a little bit of a care, like if you had a little cold frame, it could survive. The spinach that you'll have survived through the winter will get you to will do much better in the spring than stuff that you planted. It'll when I say much better, it'll hold from bolting for a much longer time than the stuff that you plant early on in the spring. So spinach is definitely the crop to start in your garden at this point. The second crop that really likes being planted in the garden at this point are peas. So peas can germinate in fairly cold weather. So, and unlike beans are a crop that does not like cold at all. Peas they're originally from Europe, and a lot of the crops that do well in cold springs are crops that are originally from Europe. Maybe like kind of Eurasia, and they're not the tropical crops, or they're not the crops more that are Mediterranean, which some of them might prefer a little bit warmer conditions. So peas do like germinating in cold weather, and they grow really well. And again, this is also a crop that doesn't love when it's too hot. If it's too hot, they might not germinate so well. So they're really good as an early crop. And there's a lot of different peas you can grow. So they're like shelling peas. You can grow snow peas. You can grow sugar snap peas. All of those do pretty well right now. One thing is, so this is a pea we have called sugar magnolia that has a bit of a darker seed. And often seeds that are a little bit darker will germinate easier in the spring. And we've noticed this one has had a lot of good survival in colder conditions than some other peas. And even like if you grow a dark bean in soil, you shouldn't do it before the last frost dates, but if you grow a dark bean, it'll germinate quicker than a light bean generally. And so that's something to maybe look at in some of the seeds that you're doing. Some varieties might do better than others, even though they're all the same species. So all these peas do great in cool weather, but some will do well in even a little bit cooler weather. Because one of the challenges you have when you're growing at this time is it's not so much that the plant can't handle the frost, is that sometimes it's too cold and wet, and the seed might, specifically with peas, this pea seed might rot before it germinates. And so once it germinates, you're going to be fine with your peas. They'll take pretty cold weather, but until they germinate, that's the trickier part. And so that's what a seed that's a bit darker will give you an edge with that. So that's the second. So we did spinach, peas, and the third crop I'm going to mention is radishes. And so this is nice because it's a little bit of diversity with your spring garden. And what's nice, so the peas that you're going to sow now, you'll only be eating them at the end of June. The radishes that you sow now, you'll be eating at the end of May. And so radishes are a great crop right now because the reward is so quick. And it's a vegetable, something you can bite into. Not that spinach isn't a vegetable, but it's really nice to have something crunchy and that tastes like spring before you have other types of crops. So radishes are a phenomenal crop to grow right now. And there's a lot of different radishes. So there's kind of round radishes or French breakfast radishes. There are other types of radishes. On the right, I have some watermelon radish and some daikon radish. And something that's important to know is these radishes on the right are what are called winter radishes. And even though they have radish in the name, you shouldn't be growing them at this point. I think somebody might have their mic on. Can I see who that might be? And we can just try to, if you have your mic on, please, no, it looks like everybody's muted at this point. Thanks. And so winter radishes, you don't want to sow at this point. They get planted around mid-July. So around July 15th, sometime between July 15th and the beginning of August is when you want to plant a winter radish. And then they will grow through the later part of the summer and be ready in the fall. If you plant them now, you probably won't get a nice radish. They're probably just going to go to flower and you won't get something satisfying. It's something woody and disappointing. So don't plant winter radishes, but the radishes on the left, which what I'd call spring radishes, those are fantastic to plant at this time of year and very, very satisfying what they'll bring you. Another crop is rapini. And rapini is a crop. It's a great crop to sow now because it likes the cooler weather. When you grow it in the summer, the rapini flat florets, the little broccoli heads, they grow really too quick and they'll go to flower and they'll get really woody. So rapini is a crop it's a little floret that you're eating generally. You can eat the leaves too. It's the heat of the summer, they grow too quick. So the spring, when you grow them, they're going to mature near the end of May, early part of June if you plant them. Well, it takes about 6 weeks. And so now's a good time of year for them to grow at a nice pace. You have to make sure you harvest them regularly so they don't go woody. If you're just eating the leaves, you can harvest at any point. So that's a great crop to grow now. It's also a great crop that if you like rapini, it can be hard to find good rapini in the grocery store. Some places have it, but not all the places. And so it's great to grow it directly at your house. So that's a fourth crop. And then a fifth crop, and this is one you might not be familiar with, is called garden cress. And so this is a quick growing green. It's ready in 2 to 3 weeks and it loves cool weather. So this is a really quick growing, satisfying green to grow in the spring. It has a very peppery flavor. So you probably wouldn't only eat this. It's very intense, similar to the flavor of nasturtiums. So this is great as a garnish in another salad, maybe with a spinach salad or some other like lettuce or other greens if you have it, or put it on a salad or add it to other things. And it's quick growing and it's delicious. So this is the fifth crop that I'm bringing. And so I've chosen these crops because they all tolerate cold weather and they're all something fun to have in your garden. Now, there are some other crops that can grow at this time of year. And I thought I would just highlight them. And I just put them all on the screen. And I'm going to just go through them quickly. So Swiss chard and kale, very easy to grow at this point. Lettuces, almost all lettuce. Some lettuce varieties like cold more than others, but most lettuces do really well right now. Arugula and different brassica greens are great at this time of year, though they'll germinate well and they grow quickly, but they tend to go to flower pretty quickly. They don't like sometimes the cold will stress them out a little bit more, as opposed to if you're growing them near the end of May. So if you grow them early on, they go to flower much quicker based on cold, where something like lettuce will hold in the ground for a longer period. Lettuce is a fantastic spring crop. Beets and carrots can be planted right now, and they'll germinate fine. One thing about growing something like carrots right now is they can do well, but they're going to grow slowly. And so if you have a lot of weeds, the weeds are probably going to go much quicker than the carrots. And so if you want to have a night, so you probably only want to sow a bit of carrots right now so that you have some early carrots, and then sow a main season crop in mid-May or around the 1st of June that'll go into the ground when the soil is warmer and it'll germinate quicker and it'll take off better, and then it'll be easier to stay ahead of the weeds. Bok choy and other like quick growing Chinese cabbages are also great at this time of year. They can bolt a bit like other brassica greens. And then turnips, also, they really like this weather, a lot like radishes. So these are all crops that also can do pretty good. So what's the next step? I'm going to wrap this up shortly, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion. But what's the next step at this point? So the first thing to do is go and look in your garden. Go and see what it looks like. Put your hands in the soil and see if it's still swampy or if it's dried out a bit. And if it's dried out a bit, you should sow some seeds. What's important, so I've talked about some of the crops you can consider. You want to sow just enough to get you to the next phase of the summer. These crops, even though they can grow well, as I mentioned with the carrots, they're not going to be growing at their peak speed, and they might not stay ahead of weeds as much as some stuff that you'll do later on, even though they'll survive. And so right now what you sow is really to have early greens and vegetables. Hold off on your main crops till later on. And that's a really important thing to do. Right now, what you're doing is just to get something that you want to eat that's fresh. And there's going to be time to plant more later on. So that's so don't forget that. Now, at this point, I'm going to promote our seed company. We're from Tourne-Sol, and then you probably found us through Facebook, so you probably know who we are. And on our website, I have actually created a section right on the landing page of all varieties that are good for April and May. So if you are looking for a place and you already have some, you could jump into there. And our seeds are in a lot of different stores around here too. Now, this, as I mentioned, is the first of my hopefully monthly gardening workshops. So I'm planning on giving one every month for the foreseeable future. And the next one is going to be on 17th of May. Tentatively, it's going to be about beans, fresh beans, dry beans, pole beans, bush beans. I'm not 100% sure I'm going to commit to that topic, but that's what I'm thinking it's going to be. And there'll be a registration form that's going to go up soon. So you'll get a link to it and you can come out and watch that. And thank you so much for the presentation part. And I would love to answer any questions that any of you might have. You could enter them in the chat, or you could unmute yourself and ask them. And remember, you are being recorded. So if you'd rather just type your questions, then I'm happy to answer them. And we can go from there.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go for it, Grace.
Yeah, thanks. How about mustard? The most of the things you mentioned that we can plant now are cruciferous vegetables. So I'm wondering about two things. One is mustard, and the other one is raviol.
So mustard does great at this time of year, but like other brassica greens, it can get stressed out by the frost. And so it's one that it won't kill it, that it might go to flower quickly. And one way to offset that is to make sure that you're planting. This is a time of year that if plants have the fertility they need and the moisture they need, which is usually not a problem, if they have the fertility and the moisture they need, they'll grow quicker than if they're limited on one of those things. And if they're limited on one of those things, then the cold can really stress them out and take them off. And then adding a little bit of warmth on really cold nights might also keep them from bolting. But so mustards can do really great. And especially if you're going to eat them at small stage, then you don't worry as much about the bolting. So rabiol, those are turnips, and they do great at this time of year. And they're not going to bolt the same way something like a mustard green would. Now, one thing about turnips at this time of year is there can be a little cabbage moth, a moth that can lay eggs around the outside of them. So you can get little worms on the root itself or tunneling through it. And that can be, you don't have as much of a problem in the summer as you do in the spring with it. But if you're just growing a small garden, you might not see that as a problem. So. Jen,
yeah. Sorry, and one more question about rapini. There's rapini that take different amounts of time to mature. And I'm wondering whether, which type of rapini one should sow at this point.
You can sow any of the types at this point. It would probably be worth sowing a quicker growing one right now, just to have it quicker. And then in a couple weeks, let's say around the May 10th, when the soil's a little bit warmer, then maybe you'd sow a number of rapinis at the same time to get them. And that's assuming that you love rapini that much, that you want that much rapini in your garden. And you can alternatively also sow it every couple weeks. And so then it'll come in, but it does. The summer is tough on rapini because it just grows to flowers so quick.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. So Jen, you have your question. You have a hand raised.
I do. I had two little questions. One, I've never managed to get Bok Choy that forms those beautiful bulbs like yours does. And is there like a trick? Do I have to water it really consistently? Does it really just need that cold weather? I really can't, I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong.
So with Bok Choy, often to get the perfect bulbs, often in the spring, starting from a transplant will give you a better bulb than direct seeded, and give it a
Okay.
little bit more space. Bok choy much more prefers the fall weather to have perfect bulbs
Oh,
than the spring weather. So the spring weather, you got to give it a little bit more babying than in the fall. In the fall, if you sow bok choy or transplant it out kind of in early August, you'll have some really great stuff in the fall. And you
okay.
can grow it through the summer too. Sometimes bok choy also will, not always, but sometimes it'll give secondary heads that are nicer than the first heads. And
Oh.
a little bit more space will do better than if they're grown really, really tight together.
Okay, so I could cut off the base and just wait for it to form a second one. Is that correct? Or pull
Yes.
it or, okay,
Yeah, they don't always do that, but sometimes in the
Okay.
autumn, I noticed they tend to do that a little bit more.
okay, cool. And in August, I could just direct seed and it would be okay?
Yeah, you can direct seed it. Though really, if you want perfect bok choy, I consider transplanting it.
Okay, I'll do that in August too. Second question, really quick. I think I saw that you guys are planting onions soon at the farm.
Yes.
Yes, so those are also slightly cold tolerant, right? Because I
Yeah.
have my onions and I feel like they're ready to like soon go.
Onion,
But
yeah, today I really focused on direct seeded crops.
right, okay, sorry,
Um,
okay,
But well, no, that's a great question.
Okay.
There are crops like, so onions we planted ours out today. No, yesterday the team was planting some of them out. They're going to continue on as the weather got a bit wet, but they're going to keep planting
Mhm.
it again. You could plant, onions are really, really cold hardy.
Okay.
But you would want to have started them, I guess early March to have
I
them.
did.
So you're fantastic. Other people listening, now is
Okay,
a great time. The one that I didn't think about is green onions. You could sow green onions right now, and those will size up, and you'll have them sometime in early to mid-June. So that's something.
okay,
And stuff like broccoli, cabbages, those are crops that you can plant also around May 1st. You wouldn't want to plant too early of those crops. And I guess if you're in zone 5 and up, you could plant like broccoli or cabbage as of May 1st, because they can take they don't like too cold temperatures, because they could bolt. And so that's usually, so I wouldn't plant them in early April, whereas some of these other crops would do fine in that weather.
okay. That's
Okay.
awesome. Thanks a lot, Dan.
No problem, Jen. So Louise asked the question, you've sown radishes and spinach last week, but they haven't showed up yet. So for the radish spinach, I think it's just a matter of time. I think they probably will come. Things are just a little bit slower right now to germinate compared to earlier. One thing that you can sometimes do is put something on top of them just to help them germinate. But once they germinate, you got to take that cover off, because you don't want it to kill them. It's just a little bit of patience right now. And we have actually had so it's been a very early spring, but a very cold spring. And so this is a kind of year where what I'm talking about up until now is not been ideal to gardening. This has been a year more where you want to have a cold frame. So like maybe a box with a window on top of it, or some mini tunnels. Whereas last year was the year that you could have probably been sowing in early April, and it would really do well. And that's one thing that, springs change from one to the other. But a little bit of patience might be important at this point. And we are going through a warm period right now. So you might suddenly see those crops pop out of the ground, and you'll see some weeds pop out of the ground too. So stay on top of those. Gail, you've asked, leaf miner is a problem for you in spinach and Swiss chard. Will seeding now get ahead of the leaf miner? I don't have any good advice on the leaf miner. Sometimes it's a problem. If it's seeding, I don't have a good answer, so I'm not gonna make something up, unfortunately for you. Or maybe it's fortunate to make something up, but I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer. Catherine, you started leeks from seeds in February. Can you plant them out now? Somebody, I think, maybe just joined. Okay, I think no. You can plant. So you could plant leeks out right now if you have them. One thing is, You know, if it's nice.
C'est Catherine.
Salut, Catherine. So you can plant leeks out right now. Oh, sorry. So Catherine, you can plant leeks out right now if you started them indoors.
Es-tu là?
Pardon, est-ce que tu m'entends? Okay, I'm just going to continue the answer. Though, if your leeks are really, really skinny, you might want to keep them indoors a little bit longer. One thing about leeks is that you're going to plant them now, and they're only going to be harvested sometime in September. And so that's a really long time in the ground. And if you plant them really skinny right now, it's a long time for weeds to take control. Whereas if you let them grow another week or two and they're a bit bigger, that might give them a bit of an edge over weeds. And so that's one of the challenges that happens when you want to grow early, you want to plant early to have early vegetables, but you're planting into subpar conditions. And so sometimes it's worth waiting a little bit longer if it's going to be in the ground for a long time. So right now you plant, just keep in mind that what you're planting is the stuff to give you an edge on the growing season, but it's not your main crops. And that's really one of the really important lessons to take away from here. So if there's any more questions, I can answer those. But otherwise, I would say thank you so much for joining me. And I hope you've had a good time and you hope you learned something. And pay attention for future workshops coming. And have a great day.